Ron Duguay, you know him, you love him, with the New York Rangers from 1977 to 83, and then again from 86 to 88. Played in the National Hockey League, 860 games. He's our Rangers insider and just one hell of a great guy, and he joins us today from the Sunshine State. There's nobody else. Can we get him on my screen? There's nobody else I'd rather talk to about what's gone on this week with the New York Rangers than the great Ron Duguay. Dukes, how are you, my friend?
I'm like everyone else, waking up to what just happened the last 48 hours. I've been listening to you guys, and you guys sound angry. And I spent the morning, because I did my podcast up in the Blue Seats, New York Post. I talked to Larry Brooks, who broke the story, and I was able to ask him, give me some insight on what happened. Why did this happen? And why JD? JD, beloved New York Ranger all time. He goes back to 1973 when he was a player. Then he did radio. Really like guy. How do you just fire a guy like that? Someone had to be really angry. And so this has to be bigger than we know. There's things that we don't know. But from what I'm told, from what Larry's telling me, is that Jim Dolan, the owner, was not happy with the direction of the team. What does that mean? Well, those are answers I think you can guess at. Well, I think what ticked them off is the two games they lost against the Islanders. How easily they lost to the Islanders. Opportunity to possibly make it into the playoffs. Are only like 4 points out. And it's how they lost. And so you go to me, you go to the character of the team. They're probably one of the youngest teams in the NHL, a lot of skill. But do they have the type of players that it takes to play tough hockey, to play real hockey? Not pawn hockey, but real hockey. And so that's where I've always questioned it. And I started last year in the playoffs when they got beat by Carolina. And so there hasn't been much adjustment. The only adjustment they made was in the wrong direction. They got rid of Lemieux and Tony DeAngelo, two guys that play with a little bit of grit. Now you're left with whom? So I think all this was in question. And if Jim Dolan didn't like the results against the Islanders, then you see what happens to his franchise player, Panarin, in Washington. He gets dragged around like a rag doll in front of everyone to see there's no response. So that might have been the tipping point for him. So these are all questions still to be answered, but he basically saying, don't like the direction of where the team is going. And I felt the same way. I've been feeling it the same way. And so it's just unfortunate that JD's got to go, and then you got to look, is the coach safe? Because, was he just relying on what the manager was going to give him? Did he not have any input on the type of players he wanted? So these are all things that we're going to find out. There's only 2 games left. We're going to find out through the course of the offseason.
Oh, man. You're just killing it here. And remind me, because now the flood of viewer comments are coming in. For instance, Joseph Jones says Ron Duguay invented the morning skate in the 70s. Hang on, we got to come back on that. Can you imagine getting credit for that? But when you said the tipping point, I thought the statement was that in your Twitter guy, you're saying it had nothing to do with that. Almost like Dolan wasn't aware there was a statement. It's because our team didn't stand up to this. Is that what you're saying?
I can't give you a different answer. I'm reading between the lines, and I'm kind of seeing it the way I see it. Yes, they weren't happy with the NHL, but I'm almost happy. I'm glad that they didn't suspend them going into that game, because it forced the Rangers to respond. Let's see what this team is made of. And so certain players stood up, and the rest kind of just played their regular game, and that kind of tells you who the rest are. But there's a few guys that stood up. They did what they had to do. Smith goes after Wilson, which, I expected that, and I thought that's all we were going to expect. But I'm glad they didn't suspend them. This was the old-fashioned way. Sometimes teams can police each other. And, yes, I didn't like what Wilson did. He's picking on a little guy. He's picking on a franchise guy. He's the type of guy. It's not old news that this guy loses it occasionally. He'll do something a little bit goofy. And he's been suspended for intent to injure. I believe that. But I didn't mind that I wanted to see what the Rangers are going to do, from the coaching staff to the players. Now they got a tough kid in the minors that they could have called up. I'm not remembering his name. Big kid that can fight. They didn't call him up. I'm like, what? So I think it was a good way to expose the team, expose how they're thinking. And so, yes, they should have suspended them, but I'm glad they didn't.
Well, what a wild wake-up call for a dressing room then. And you saw all the interviews after the game. The guys didn't like being challenged and called soft. They'd heard it for 48 hours, right? So they went out and took their aggressions out on the Washington Capitals. But I'm like, if it takes this much to wake you guys up, what have you been sleepwalking all year? So you like the response, but where do we go from here?
Well, it was a mandatory response. Let's put it that way. They had to do it, right? They had to dig down deep. And I don't want to say what I was going to say, but they had to dig down deep and to man up because it was embarrassing. And so for guys that are going from year to year who want to continue being on part of the Ranger team, some of the guys had to do something. Strome, I like Strome. I've always liked him. He'll stand up for the guys, but they just don't have enough of them. And so I don't know what would have been said from the coaches to the players. Like, you have to do this and you have to do that. I'm sure he just brought it up in a way, hey, we got to do something. And I'm sure it was among the players they started talking. Their starting lineup goes out there and they all start their fight, which is, that's another part that I don't quite understand. Well, I understand it. It's just that guys are fighting a guy that had nothing to do with what happened with Wilson. But I think they're just fighting just for the sake of fighting. So there's a certain code in hockey that you have to show some pride and take care of each other. So we saw some of that, and I think the Ranger players can feel good about it. But moving forward, you need, when you look at the Washington team, if you're going to challenge that team physically, they got at least 5 guys that will get in your face and stand up to you. At least 5 guys. The Ranger, they have one, and he's a middleweight. That's Smith.
Yeah, and they just won a Stanley Cup. That's the other thing lost in all this. The Capitals apparently have zero problem with Tom Wilson, Ron. Zero. They're his own team.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you ask any coach, any manager, they'd love to have him on his team. It's just a matter of managing him a little bit. Make sure he doesn't cross the line, which he has a few times. But he puts players, defensemen, in fear every time he's on the ice. You don't think defensemen on every team, most of the teams, they're looking over their shoulder when they know he's on the ice? That's the way it used to be, and that's the way it should be. Just like he crashes and bang, goes to the net. Ovechkin feels very safe with playing with him on the same line, and so he protects his guys. So every coach and manager would love to have him. It's just that in today's game, with the new rules, he's got to be a lot more careful.
From our viewers, Jay Nordic watching says, Duguay hit the nail on the head. The team is built like a house of cards. From James Henderson in Borden, Manitoba. Now that's a hockey guy. From Jeff Kibilis in Winnipeg. Ron's old school. He'd probably go knock out Milbury if he could. That's days gone by. Wayne in Victoria, BC. Ron Duguay is awesome. I now understand why the firings happened. But I still think the NHL has missed the boat on not suspending Tom Wilson. We're agreeing on that, Wayne, but as Ron's just said, he's glad that it didn't happen because we got to see what the Rangers are made of. But having said this, because I follow what you say about the Rangers, because I don't follow the Rangers as close. I go by what you say. So how did you feel when Chris Knobloch coached the team, who, by the way, is from here, Imperial, Saskatchewan? He did a great job, Ron. Where do the Rangers go from here this summer and in the years ahead?
Well, I can't answer that. I want to answer it in a certain way. It's just because I can't fully answer it because I'm not there. I'm not in the dressing room. I'm not part of discussions. I'm talking about what I'm seeing. And here's a coach that successful coach, comes out of college hockey. College hockey is a little above pond hockey. And yes, there's some hitting, but it's not like playing the NHL. So that's what he's been accustomed to doing. And I've seen this before. I had Herb Brooks. Herb Brooks shows up to New York, and all of a sudden he decides he wants to change the team. Smaller team, fast team, skilled team, but it still was a much weaker team, and he didn't see much success with that kind of player. And so with Coach Quinn, I don't know what he's going to think moving forward. I got to believe that this has to be a wake-up call for him. And let's say they hire Messier, right? as the new president or the new manager. You don't think Mess is going to come in there and say he's going to have a 5-minute meeting with him and say, look, this has to change? Because I don't know if you know, but Mess was interviewed yesterday. Did you hear about Messier's interview?
Just heard it this morning. Yes, just heard this morning.
Okay, so he essentially said, I wouldn't have built the team the way it was built. Okay, that says a lot. And then he added on to say, you got to, if you're going to win deep in the playoffs, you got to have a team that's willing to fight in the backyard, out in the street, grind it out. You got to have those type of players. And obviously the Rangers don't have it. So he just came out and said, look, that's not my team. I would change it. So I'm sure the fans listening, they would love to have Messier come in with his mindset because he understands winning.
Yeah, but John Davidson had run the St. Louis Blues, and was he not in Columbus before? Like, where's Mess been the last 25 years, Ron? Is he qualified to, well, not qualified, but you know what I mean, to run the New York Rangers? John came in hot. Where's Mess been?
Yeah. Well, that's what's confusing with me. I thought eventually JD, his influence, would eventually you'd be able to see it on the ice, and that's what's confusing to me. I don't know. I don't know why he thought that this path that they were on was going to work. I don't know if they thought, let's just change, let's play our way. Let's see if we can get the NHL to change the play of the game the way we're playing it, which is a speed game. They're a nice team to watch, and they've won some big games. They beat Pittsburgh, they beat Washington, they beat Boston. They're a fun team to watch. But when these teams decide to shut them down and start to get physical against a team like that, then they get shut down. And so for JD, for him not to see it, that's what's confusing for me. And Dolan must have known something that he didn't want to change. There must have been something for him to fire him. So that's why when I think about Messier, if you ask Messier, and he was asked that question, could you coach in the NHL today? He said, he didn't say 100%, not 200%. He said 1,000% yes, I can coach a professional team in the NHL.
Wow. But a lot of guys think that. Do you think that he could? Where's he coached?
Yeah. Well, he hasn't done a lot of coaching. He's coached kids. But from what he's saying, he's been so involved in being a player and probably in a lot of conversations with the coaches over the years that he feels in his mind that he knows he would know what to do to get behind the bench. Now, a good head coach, what makes a good head coach? Great assistants. His strength may not be to run a great practice. His strength may not be to be able to identify issues with players in practice and get them to be better, right? His main strength would be to be the head coach, be the leader, know the type of players that he wants, and know how to be a good game coach, which is knowing how to run the bench and having respect from the players. And every time those players step into the dressing room, you got Mark Messier steps into that room. I think there's a strong respect factor. And those are the things that sometimes, they don't talk about, you don't see. So he would have to have some 2 or 3 really good assistants that would help him with practice.
Then this is a major, major shakeup we're talking about. And viewer Jay Nordic writes in, he says, let the moose loose. But one of the Tri-City Americans head scout wrote in here earlier he said this is all being cleared for Messier to walk in. So you've cleared a lot of things up, Ron, but now I'm more intrigued about, I'd never heard that you'd been credited for inventing the morning skate. Has that not been around since the 50s or 60s?
Well, they say that because I wasn't there. I was nowhere to be found.
You made it the optional skate. Is that what we're saying? You made it the optional morning skate.
It. Oh, yeah. Yeah. When they said optional, I accepted optional. I wouldn't show up. I was not a big believer in morning skates because if I was very happy in my bed, relaxed, I did not want to get up and go put my gear on, go to the rink. To me, that was just a loss of energy. I wanted to perform during the game. I wanted energy in my first shift and my last shift. Going to the rink, putting my gear, going for a skate, that was a loss of energy for me. I would never do it. I hated it. And, of course, I had guys like Phil Esposito, Rod Gilbert, Kenny Hodge, all these guys at the beginning that they didn't care for it either. So those were my role models.
Oh, great role models to have, for sure. Which, by the way, I was reading yesterday in The Athletic. They said the firings yesterday were the second biggest gong show incident in Rangers history since Phil Esposito fired the coach on April Fool's Day, 1988. And I think you were there. Were you on that club when they...
Yes.
I'm sorry. We're so running out of time. But what's the Coles notes on that?
I'm sorry, what was that?
What was the Coles notes on them? On Espo firing the coach, was it Michel Bergeron? April 1st, 19...
It was Bergeron, yes.
What happened there?
Yeah, you know what? I think I was traded away. If I remember correctly, I asked Espo to trade me to L.A. because I met a woman from L.A. and I thought that I may want to settle down there. So I went to Espo. I said, Espo, can you trade me to L.A.? And 2 weeks later, he traded me to L.A.
Unbelievable.
Continue.
No, I'm serious. Now, the good news is I end up marrying her.
Right. It worked.
So, yeah. But, yeah, so I believe I had left already. Espo had fired Bergeron. But Espo is the type of guy that he's not going to wait. If he thinks there's a problem, he's going to do it right away.
Gotcha. Our intern, Rachel, watching in Toronto, she says, I'm pretty sure Fred Shiro started the morning skate in the 70s. Yes, we've got to the bottom of that, though, Rachel. Ron invented the optional morning skate if Freddie the Fog Shiro invented the morning skate. Look, I don't want to say goodbye, but we do have to time-wise. Ron, I'll just say this. I chatted with Mike Blaisdell the other day. He said to say, hey, I'm not sure if you know his son, Harry, is a Winnipeg Jets prospect. I think he's signed. He's playing at UND. But he said to say, hey, and told me a few more stories and says he misses you.
Okay. Well, hi back to Mike. Always good to be on your show. Listen, anytime you want to talk, feel free. I got my new studio here, as you can tell behind me.
I see that. Are you in Florida or are you in New York? What's your 20?
Right now I'm in Florida, but I've been going back and forth from here to LA because my kids are there and grandkids. So I'm based out of Florida. I've been based out of Florida for the last 20 years. I just travel a lot. But wow. I built a little streaming studio here at my home. Well,
I'll tell you what, it sounds like the life. You deserve it, man. Ron, thanks for this. Thanks for straightening everything out. And let's talk soon.
Okay. Good talking with you always. Bye.
The great Ron Duguay, man. We love him. And I'm so glad that I introduced him to you guys' world.
You and me both, man.
Yeah.
You and me both.
Okay.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.